Thank you very much. This discussion makes me think about public service policies that are pretty much like the tradition, the thinking is much about providing content to different target groups, and that's it. I have been studying recently how and to which extent media organizations see themselves as media educators, in which extent they should provide this kind of support for media literacy or language learning or any kind of learning. And this conception varies quite a lot from country to country when it comes to public service. For example, in Finland, the intention to reach new audiences and to do audience development is quite advanced and developed, but then in different countries that it varies a lot. So this relates to my research topic as well. But I come from Nordicom, which is the Nordic Research Center, or research center dedicated to Nordic media research at the University of Gothenburg in Sweden. And we are working in all the Nordic countries, and our task is to monitor Nordic media and communication research and also try to strengthen that field. So I was thinking of giving you an approach, how a media researcher approaches issues of informal language learning. Because I need to say that when it comes to media research, the connections between media and language are not very developed, and there should be more collaborations and more interconnections between media and communication research and language linguistic research, and this is part of our mission as well, to promote that kind of research. I'm also associate professor in journalism at the Department of Journalism, Media and Communication at the University of Gothenburg and at Tampere University in Finland. So originally I come from Finland. When I'm talking about media, I'm mostly talking about mass media, and I think language, democracy, human rights are all connected to media through mass media, but of course you can also understand media in many different things. Medium, it's something that is in between. It's a medium for communication. It can be a tool, a digital tool, or it can be whatever you define it. As a media researcher, I'm often asked that question: what do you actually mean by media? So it depends. And my take is from the journalism research and journalistic side. I also want to take a wider perspective than just media consumption when talking about migrants and media, because my argument is that production and consumption are essentially interconnected. Minority members or migrants often consume media that is also produced by the minority. Or then in online environments, the boundaries between reception and production are very blurred nowadays. And it also applies that if migrants are not represented in production, there is no consumption for them, or at least they are connected, these issues. So I wanted to discuss it from a wider perspective. And now I see that I need to.
I'm your.
And at first, I want to remind you, I don't know if this was mentioned already, but at the beginning, before the first conference on media and informal language learning, we created a Facebook group and a network gathering different people from different fields to connect on this issue. So if you haven't entered the Facebook group yet, please do that. You can find it with the name Nordic Network for Media and Information Language Learning, NIL. This is also an emerging area when it comes to doing research or being a practitioner. So we want to bring people together in the Nordic countries to discuss these issues further. When it comes to media research, there is an emerging body of research addressing migrants or refugees or any kind of minority groups and the media. When I'm talking about today, I want to refer to minorities in general, because I think that studying all kinds of minority groups, whether immigration is an issue or not, also the national minorities, this kind of research could be discussed as a group, because there, for example, research on like Sami communities is producing quite important and relevant knowledge about how to approach groups that are vulnerable and in a minority position, and it's a benefit to talk about them as a group, even if there are quite a lot of diversity in this field. And we always need to keep in mind that there are so many different groups of minorities, linguistic, ethnic, religious minorities, and migrants, first, second, third generation migrants, both forced and voluntary migration, and researchers have addressed this diversity by calling it super diversity, or hybrid-sized cultures, multi-ethnic societies, or multi-ethnic public spheres. We are living in a post-migrant condition, which doesn't mean that migration is over, but migration is an integral part of the public sphere and media, what media is doing and what we are doing with media. When we are studying these diverse groups, there are a lot of challenges, and the super diversity is one of the problems. For example, media and communication studies is a very interdisciplinary field that has no problems with dealing with interdisciplinary subjects, but also these subjects are very come from very different conditions and need interdisciplinary approaches, and not only within communication sciences, but even more diversity, more interdisciplinarity, and this is a challenge for us researchers. Research is always describing reality as well, and if, for example, media or newsroom culture are not diverse, then questions are set from that perspective very often. So research tends to reproduce the prevailing conditions. If there are no journalists with migrant background, then they are not studied. Of course, there can be very different approaches, from descriptive to more critical, normative, or interventional approaches, where you could ask the question, why are there no journalists with migrant background in this newsroom? And you could try to examine that aspect. But most of the research in the field of media and communication is dealing with the reality out there. So that's and the question of diversity is very easily returned to policymakers and practitioners, right? Then there are also, as I said, I already mentioned the disciplinary traditions. For example, interdisciplinary connections between media and communication studies and languages is not very established. Then when we think of minorities and their mediatization or different phenomena that are related to minorities and they are mediatized, then it's often that researchers are maybe interested more in the substance questions, like the well-being of migrants, or the language learning of migrants rather than the media aspects. But I would say that media research could add a layer to those kinds of aspects, and that's why collaboration would be very welcome. I think what's common for us all researchers is the methodological problems, the challenges of access. It takes more time to reach out to the minority groups because many researchers don't know where those minority groups actually are. Journalists are not very networked and they don't have access to sources that are maybe not made visible through structures. They are not organized in a way that you can reach out to an association and then you can reach out to respondents. And there is also the problem of trust, as you know. So respondents in vulnerable and marginalized position are very hard to reach. And this was, by the way, also discovered by Statistics Finland, the authority that's compiling the official statistics, because they wanted to, about 8 years ago, they wanted to do a complementary data collection among the population with foreign background to complement a register of completed education. And they included fieldwork, face-to-face interviews in 12 languages. And they also produced some good practices, or compiled some good practices to those conducting a qualitative or quantitative interview surveys with people with foreign background. And there they found out that the fact base is very time-consuming to collect. And also from the Swedish perspective, as we don't know what language, or the language or ethnicity is not registered by official bodies, it's very, or the media statistics that are produced are very majority-based. They don't distinguish between majority or minorities. So whenever you want to gain statistical or research-based knowledge among minority populations, you have to do extra effort. These are not included in the official statistics, and this is something that is being discussed all the time at the Nordic level, how to include the minority perspectives in the regular data collections, but it has not been solved yet, because there are also some many acute challenges between harmonizing statistics between the Nordic countries. Each Nordic country is collecting their data, for example, about media consumption in slightly different ways, so it's not comparable yet. Then there are also, when it comes to accessing minority groups, the question who is allowed to do that is a very acute question. Should it be a member from that community? There are problems with that as well, or should it be an external interviewer or an external researcher, and who may have problems with language, cultural competence, and may not be accepted or trusted in. So in both ways there are challenges. That makes it not easy to do research with minority and migrant groups. But how we see the general structure or the areas of study as media researchers, we always think about production, consumption, and the textual artifacts between. And then in digital environments, there is the phenomenon of the concept of produce, which is a composite of the words production and usage, or consumption, production and consumption, where that refers to the simultaneous reception or consumption and production in online environments. We are not only receivers of information, but we are also reacting upon content and sharing content and producing content of our own. And we can also be content producers by ourselves. And this applies to minority groups as well, and they may even have better possibilities of creating their own voice in the digital spheres. But if we look at these areas of study, quite short, and begin with texts, central issues here are the representation issue. Representation can be organic. It just what happens. It's recorded and covered by mass media. It can be planned. We really want to reach out to the minority groups and ask them how they feel or how they see an issue. Or then it can be even more strategic or interventional, so that we really want to develop, for example, do some participatory projects with minorities. There are a number of studies examining the coverage, how ethnicity, racism are described and constructed, not the least, for example, by populist right-wing media, or in terms of big crises like the refugees crisis. Then there are also, you can see, I left out the references because I know that you are not researchers all, but if you are interested in a particular area of research, you can always return to me and I can give some examples of this kind of research. Yeah, then there is examination of journalistic practices or how to make it more inclusive. When it comes to production, media production, studies on media markets, media structures have found out that minority groups are not very well represented there either. Mapping of minority media or minority language media or indigenous media should be done. There was, for example, in Finland and Sweden, there was a mapping done by London School of Economics in the EU area, 2002, and there some scholars went through the minority media, and they also found out, it was Ralf Kauranen and Salla Tuori who wrote that the mapping has appeared to be much more time and resource consuming than what was expected in the beginning, and it was because of the lack of an institution in these countries that could actively and regularly, systematically collect data about minority media. No library, for example, does it in a systematic way, neither does Nordicom. And this is because finding out about minorities media would need to be based on a broad survey among immigrant communities and their organizations and activists to be reliable. We don't, as majority representatives, always know about all these different channels, and this, to a great extent, this applies to digital communities and channels that we may not know about. And mapping is important because if it's not done, it will disappear from the collective memory. So that would be something to do right now. When it comes to production, mainstream mainstream newsrooms and journalistic cultures have been found out to be very middle class, white norm cultures, and minority perspectives are lacking there as well. But of course, there are initiatives how to improve journalism education which refers to academic and vocational study programs, and also journalism training, which refers to educational interventions integrated into work practices and work life. For example, in Finland, at the previous conference, we had Reetta Nousiainen from the University of Applied Sciences, Haaga-Helia, and they started 2019 a vocational study program for journalists with minority background. Recently, the Danish Journalism Education Institutions, Danish School of Journalism and Media, University of Southern Denmark, and Roskilde University received funding for a 3-year project to recruit journalism students with ethnic minority background. And in Sweden, the Journalism Education Institute, KOJO, has been planning an initiative to support second language speakers in journalism education to support or promote diversity. But production at a more general level is something that's poorly studied. It's the backstage, and often you have to know, you have to have been there yourself. You have to know the structures, the cultures, the professional identities, the professional positionings, and the processes, the workflows in order to analyze them and to know them better. Well, then finally to the consumption and usage of minorities. This kind of research has been mostly focused on access and usage of different technologies, not the least the smartphones that were already mentioned here. The other central finding from this kind of research is that migrant groups and minorities, but especially migrant groups, their uses are cross-border use. They are following maybe both the public sphere of the new country, but also their country or countries of origin. Their uses of media are very multilingual, and they don't follow the geographically defined boundaries. And then there is also some research on minority language media, but that's still quite an emerging area. And then you can say, when it comes to product usage, that the most popular, for example, YouTube content creators in Sweden, for example, are with immigrant background, because they are using world languages like Arabic, and they are then gathering very large audiences because of that, not only from their new country, but also but from different parts of the world. So the digital makes it more boundary crossing. To conclude, we, in order to promote these kinds of this kind of research, we should also pay attention to how to make academia more inclusive. We should also have researchers with minority background, media researchers with minority background, maybe. There should be incentives for researchers to include the minority perspective in, but for example, this could come from funders, to include the minority perspectives in each project, and in order to promote research, we should also think of the policy side, because minority politics, language politics, and media politics are not very coordinated nowadays. There is a lot to explore, and I have myself experienced the field of media literacy, because I've been working with media and information literacy policies, a facilitating factor here, because it needs to draw on all these different policy areas, and I think the related research on MIL does the same. So that would be one possibility, to take a MIL perspective into different organizations, activities, and in terms of minority groups and migrants groups, to find issues that should be researched. I would like you to consider, if from your organizational perspective, your own perspective, if media should be researched somehow, what would be the most acute questions to study right now? You can write them on a paper, because I see that you have papers all around. So, and you can leave those questions to me afterwards. I can then maybe compile some suggestions and also provide some literature if there is some. So please take a second and collect your thoughts regarding this question. What media aspects should be studied from your own perspective right now when it comes to migrants and migrant groups? Thank you.